We are back with more of our breaking news coverage of the mounting escalation in the Middle East. This morning, Iranian media is reporting new Israeli missile and drone strikes in Tehran. This after the U.S. dramatically reshaped this conflict when it unleashed over a dozen bunker-buster bombs on 3 Iranian nuclear sites on Saturday. On Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised President Trump's decision to carry out these attacks and touted their relationship.
I trusted him, and I think that he's proven what a great leader he is and what a great friend of Israel he is. Second to none, and none can compare.
Joining us now, former Ambassador Dennis Ross. He served as a special assistant to President Obama. He's now a counselor at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and an MSNBC foreign affairs analyst. Ambassador, what do you see as the ripple effects of these attacks in the region, and what does a diminished Iranian nuclear program mean for its neighbors?
Well, there's an interesting duality here. If you look at all of Iran's neighbors right now, they would like this war to come to an immediate end because they don't want to be ensnared in it. On the other hand, every single one of them is not at all unhappy that Iran has been dramatically weakened. Combination of Iran having been dramatically weakened and its whole regional proxy network also having been dramatically weakened. So the psychic and practical security landscape in the Middle East today is quite different than it was before. Iran will be much less of a threat over time to all of its neighbors than it has been. In the near term, there will be concern about escalation that could draw them in. If that's not the case, they will basically be breathing a pretty strong sigh of relief and feel much more confident about the future.
The New York Times writes that the U.S. involvement in this conflict between Israel and Iran, quote, cements Netanyahu's political comeback. Prime Minister Netanyahu has wanted to thwart Iran's nuclear capabilities for decades. What does this moment mean for his level of power in this region?
I think at one level, he is going to feel a combination of vindication, but also a kind of satisfaction. He has been preoccupied with this issue for the last 20 years. I've often described it as his Winston Churchill issue. There may be many other issues he cares about, but none compares to this. So he will approach things now as if he has, in some ways, removed, at least maybe not removed, but mitigated the stain on him from October 7, 2023. He always described himself as Mr. Security. October 7, 2023 was the worst day in Israel's history from a security standpoint, from a humanitarian standpoint, from a standpoint of pure sense of security of Israelis. Dealing with what Israelis agree across the board. They may disagree on many issues, but this is not one on which they disagree. There's a collective sense that Iran with nuclear weapons would be an existential threat to the state of Israel. So he will have dealt with that in a way that looks credible and appears to have set back the program. And in many ways, I think for him, it will be a kind of culmination of his career. I would expect him in some ways maybe to surprise people and to be prepared to move quickly to end the war in Gaza and withdraw from it as well. In no small part because then he can get the hostages back, and no one will question that if there's an agreement for them to withdraw, that if there's a violation, Israel will respond. So I do think there's a potential to see that emerge from this as well, provided this war ends soon, as I think both he and President Trump hope it will.
Well, that's interesting because you're right. We haven't focused much on what's happening in Gaza. It certainly seems like Israel's focus has been on Iran as well in terms of their priorities right now. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister met with Russia's President Vladimir Putin today. Putin slamming the U.S. attacks as unjustified, although not necessarily offering specific support of Iran. But he did say they're looking into ways to help the Iranians. How much weight does that carry coming from Putin?
I think it is more rhetoric than reality. He also said something at the same time that the reason they haven't done much is because there's so many Russian speakers in Israel that he considers that he views them as still being Russian citizens somehow. So it's also his explanation for why they don't offer real practical help. I do think from an Iranian standpoint, if they are going to find a way to end this with, in a sense, their dignity intact, they will want not to respond to the U.S., but to someone else like the Russians or the Chinese. They can respond to them and not look like they have conceded anything. And I think that will be a very strong motivation for them.
What do you mean they could respond to them? What could that response be? What is that sort of off-ramp for them?
I think if they were to make a proposal for ending the war, it would be something the Iranians would find much easier to respond to than if it's a proposal coming from us for a ceasefire and negotiations.
Would the U.S. want to get China or Russia involved?
Look at President Trump's relationship with Putin. Putin has a real interest to score points with him as a way of ensuring he doesn't maintain support militarily for Ukraine. The president has touted his relationship with Putin, so I can actually see President Trump sort of claiming this is the benefit of that relationship. As for the Chinese, they don't want to see an explosion of the war. They don't want to see $300 barrel oil.
Right.
And they would have an interest also in bringing this to an end. In the case of the Iranians, being able to appear to respond to either the Russians or the Chinese won't look like it's such a capitulation. So think about if they're looking for a way out, which I think they will be after they do something. The Supreme Leader will want to show that they did something. They didn't just get attacked and didn't respond in some fashion. But there'll be a little bit of a one-off from his standpoint, and he will want something that gives him a cover for being able to stop this. So I would think about Russia or China as possibly playing that role. And I don't see President Trump necessarily thinking that's a bad thing.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, an interesting idea, something we'll be watching closely. Thank you very much.